The reform ideas that the Uluru Statement calls for are voice, treaty and truth. Let me speak to the substance and the sequencing of those reform proposals. At the core of Uluru is treaty. This is what Uluru called for. Makarrata is the culmination of our agenda. We seek a Makarrata Commission to supervise the process of agreement making between governments and First Nations and truth-telling about our history. Let me repeat myself. At the core of the Uluru Statement is treaty, the settlement of an agreement between First Nations, the First Nations of Australia and the Commonwealth Parliament on behalf of the Australian people. The agenda for the Makarrata would be those very matters identified in the original Social Justice Package report. Furthermore, we now have a benchmark for treaty negotiations in the form of the 2007 United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. This is something we did not have when the 1995 Social Justice Package was produced. Makarrata negotiations would centre on the shortfall between the rights currently available to First Nations in Australia and those that are declared by the international community, by international law, to be rights to which Indigenous peoples are entitled. The first question that will face any treaty process will be, what structure will advance treaty negotiations? The proper sequencing of the reform is crucial. Treaties that are not premised on the country's federal structure are not binding treaties. Furthermore, political change at the provincial level also makes state-based treaties and territory treaties vulnerable. This state, South Australia, is a good example of what can happen with a change from a Labor government to the LNP. No treaty process is guaranteed. And Victoria, the Northern Territory and Queensland are yet to be tested by a change in government. Perhaps the most salient issue concerning state-based treaty making is their quality. Will they amount to anything more than service delivery agreements? Without the fiscal dominance and capacity of the Commonwealth Government, what can these state and territory governments really commit to in terms of the financial resources that are required to underwrite treaty commitments? These provincial agreements may be strong on the rhetoric of treaty, but without the overarching legislative power of the Commonwealth Parliament and its financial capacity, they will be nothing like the treaties envisaged by advocates since the 1970s. As Victoria has done, a political voice is needed first to do the hard work that is required to underpin treaty making. Let me address substantively the reasons for an enshrined voice. It is a structural change, a structural reform to Australia's public institutions. It means that it will compel the Commonwealth to have us at the table on any laws or policies that are made about our lives, and that is what the force of law can do in the Constitution. It compels the government, the Parliament, to have us at the table. If it's in legislation, as the Wyatt process says, it can only oblige, it cannot compel. The voice that the Uluru Dialogues envisaged was one that would be made up of PBCs and the very, very many ways in which nations organise themselves today. It was meant to be a First Nations voice to the Parliament. It was meant to give us control of the IAS money and the funds that they took away after the abolition of ATSIC, so that we can control our own lives and distribute our own money and take control.